The fox barked once, sharp, panicked, then fell silent. Rain poured through the canopy, pounding the dirt road into a river of mud. A dog lay half submerged at the edge of the ditch, his white fur streaked with blood, one paw twisted in a metal snare. The fox nudged him, whining. When the dog didn't move, he pressed closer, curling his soaked body around the limp frame. The wind howled, trees snapping somewhere in the dark, but the fox didn't flinch. His muzzle trembled against the dog's neck, licking away the mud, as if the gesture alone could keep him alive. Headlights sliced through the downpour. A truck slowed. Mara hit the brakes so hard the tires skidded sideways. She leaned forward over the wheel, blinking through the rain-smeared windshield. Two shapes, one red, one pale. The pale one, familiar. Her heart dropped. She jumped out before thinking. The mud swallowed her boots to the ankle. Her flashlight beam cut across the ditch, and there they were. The fox standing over the body of a dog, shoulders hunched, eyes glowing amber. "Luca," she breathed. The name caught in her throat. The fox froze, ears twitching. The dog didn't respond. She took one step closer, slipping on the incline. The fox bared his teeth, a short hiss, not a threat, just a line drawn. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered, her breath white in the cold. "I'm helping him." The dog's paw was still caught. The snare had dug deep, raw flesh, blood mixing with rust. Mara dropped to her knees, mud soaking her jeans, and reached for the trap. The fox didn't move. He just stared, the muscles in his neck tight, his tail low but steady. She pried the metal open with shaking hands. When it finally released, the dog let out a broken sound, half yelp, half exhale, then went limp. "Stay with me," she murmured, pressing her hand to his chest. The faint thud of a heartbeat pulsed against her palm. Still alive. The fox took a cautious step forward, his muzzle close enough to touch her sleeve. For a second, she felt his breath, hot, wild, unafraid. Then, just as suddenly, he turned and vanished into the trees. Mara lifted the dog in her arms. He was heavier than she remembered. Every step back to the truck felt endless. The rain soaked her hair, her clothes, her heartbeat echoing louder than the thunder. She laid him on the passenger seat, cradled his head, and started the engine. Through the blur of rain on the glass, she glanced back. The road was empty, except for a single red shape at the tree line. The fox stood there, motionless, staring straight at her. Then lightning struck somewhere behind him, and he was gone. At the clinic, the vet moved fast. "He's in shock," he said, checking the wound. "Deep infection. Maybe 2 days in that trap." Mara nodded, but her eyes stayed on the dog's face. Luca had been gone since Friday night. She'd searched every trail, every back road. Finding him like that, and with a fox of all things, felt like stepping into a story that wasn't hers. When the vet took him to the back, Mara sat on the floor of the waiting room, arms wrapped around her knees. The smell of antiseptic mixed with wet fur clung to the air. She could still see it, the fox standing over Luca, not running even when she approached. Something about that look in his eyes, fierce, almost human, wouldn't leave her mind. Wild animals didn't guard dying dogs. They fled, unless there was a reason. The storm had broken by morning, leaving the world washed clean, but eerily quiet. Mara drove back to the woods, parking where she'd stopped before. She carried a bag, chicken, water, an old towel. She didn't even know why she was doing it. Maybe out of guilt, maybe curiosity. She left the food near the ditch, then stepped back. The forest was still, dripping, watching her. When she returned the next day, the food was gone. The ground was stamped with prints, small sharp ones circling the spot, and beside them larger ones, rounder, heavier. Her pulse quickened. She followed the trail into the trees, branches whipping against her sleeves. The air smelled of moss and earth. The tracks led her to a hollow under an old oak, half hidden by roots. She crouched. Her flashlight beam trembled over two tiny shapes. Kits, their fur the color of rust, eyes barely open. They whimpered softly. Mara's breath hitched. "Oh my God!" From the corner of her eye, a flicker of movement. She turned and froze. The fox was there, standing no more than 10 feet away, watching her. His fur glistened with dew, his gaze steady. He didn't growl, didn't move. just stood guard. That's when it hit her. Luca had found them first. He'd been caught in the trap trying to protect the fox's den. And when he couldn't escape, the fox had stayed, keeping him alive the only way he knew how. Mara backed away slowly, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from awe. The fox's eyes followed her until the forest swallowed him again. She whispered into the silence, almost afraid to hear her own voice. "He saved your family, didn't he?" And somewhere back in the clinic, miles away, Luca stirred in his sleep. A low, steady whine echoing in the dark, as if answering her from a dream. The clinic smelled of iodine and fear. Luca's breathing was steadier now, his bandaged leg raised on a sling. Machines hummed in the corner, their green lights blinking like patient heartbeats. Mara had been there 3 nights in a row, sleeping on a plastic chair by the window. Each dawn she'd wake to the sound of the vet unlocking the front door and whispering, "He's still with us." She'd nod, rub the sleep from her eyes, and step outside for air. But every morning her gaze drifted to the same place, the distant line of trees at the edge of town. She couldn't stop thinking about those golden eyes watching her from the dark. On the 4th day, Luca finally tried to stand. His leg trembled, but held. The vet smiled. "He's a fighter," he said. "Whatever got him through that storm, it wasn't luck." Mara looked at Luca, his mismatched eyes, one blue, one brown, and whispered, "Someone was watching over him." The vet raised an eyebrow. "Someone?" She hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding insane. "There was a fox," she said finally. "When I found him, it stayed with him." The vet chuckled softly, like humoring a child. "Foxes don't do that, Ms. Reyes. They'd eat the scraps and run." "I saw it," she said, her voice firm. "He wasn't afraid, he was guarding him." The vet said nothing, just patted her shoulder and walked away. But Mara couldn't shake the image. It haunted her every time Luca whimpered in his sleep, every time the rain started against the window. That afternoon, she packed a thermos of coffee, her camera, and Luca's old collar, cracked leather, still carrying the faint smell of pine. Then she drove back to the forest road where everything had happened. The ditch was dry now, but the mud still carried prints hardened into the soil. She followed them into the woods, moving quietly, listening. A squirrel darted across a fallen log. Crows shifted on the branches above. The forest was alive again, but it felt like it was waiting for her. She reached the hollow under the oak, half expecting it to be empty. Instead, she froze. The blanket she'd left was still there, torn, moved, reshaped into a small nest. The kits were gone. Only a single paw print remained, larger now, clearer. The fox had returned. Mara knelt, touching the edge of the print with her fingertips. It was still damp. He was nearby, watching. She lifted her head, scanning the trees. The silence was heavy. Then from behind her a soft rustle. She turned just in time to see a flash of red vanish between the trunks. "Wait!" she called. The forest swallowed her voice. Mara followed, her pulse racing. The undergrowth thickened, branches clawing at her sleeves. She caught glimpses. A tail, a flicker of movement, the glint of fur in the light. It was as if the fox wanted her to follow. After 10 minutes, the trail opened into a clearing. In the center stood the remains of an old hunting cabin, collapsed roof, walls wrapped in ivy. The door hung off its hinges. Inside, it smelled of rust, wood, and old animal scent. And there, in the corner, a line of empty cans, bits of rope, a broken trap. Her stomach dropped. The same kind that had caught Luca. She crouched, examining the metal teeth of the snare. The hinges were twisted, as if someone, or something, had tried to tear it open. The marks were deep, uneven, bite marks. Her breath quickened. Behind her, leaves crunched softly. She turned slowly and froze. The fox stood in the doorway, the light spilling around him like a halo. His fur looked brighter here, almost golden against the shadows. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "I'm not your enemy," Mara whispered. The fox tilted his head, blinking slowly. Then his gaze dropped to her hand, the collar she was still holding. His ears flicked back. A low sound rose from his throat, not a growl but something closer to grief. Mara followed his stare and realized Luca's scent must still linger on the leather. "You knew him," she breathed. "Didn't you?" The fox took a step closer, then another. Mara didn't move. She could see the rise and fall of his chest, the faint tremor in his whiskers. He stopped within reach, eyes locked on hers. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them, human and wild, bound by something unspoken. Then a sound shattered it, the snap of a branch. The fox jolted and spun. Mara turned toward the noise, two figures emerging through the trees, rifles slung over their shoulders. Hunters. She froze. The older man squinted. "You shouldn't be here, Mom," he said. "These woods are private." Mara straightened. "There's wildlife here, traps, snares." "Not ours," the younger one cut in, smirking. "Fox problem, we're just cleaning it up." The words hit like a punch, cleaning it up. The fox had vanished again, gone in the instant their attention shifted. Mara's hands tightened around the collar. "That fox saved my dog," she said quietly. The older man shrugged. "Then your dog was lucky? But don't expect the same luck twice." They walked past her, voices fading. The smell of gun oil lingered. When she turned back toward the clearing, the doorway was empty. The forest had gone dead silent again. Mara sank to her knees. Her heart was pounding, not just from fear, but from understanding. The traps, the wounds, the loyalty. Luca hadn't stumbled into that snare by accident. He'd been there before. He'd come back to protect the same fox that had once protected him, and now hunters were after both. That night, back home, Mara sat beside Luca's bed. He lifted his head, eyes cloudy but alert. She ran a hand over his fur, whispering, "You knew him, didn't you? You went back for him." Luca's tail thumped weakly once, then twice. Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant this time, but growing closer. Mara looked at the forest beyond the window, her mind made up. If the hunters were returning tomorrow, she would be there first, because whatever debt existed between that fox and her dog, it wasn't finished, and neither was she. The next morning broke grey and heavy, clouds stacked low over the valley. Mara hadn't slept. Every sound outside, a car door, a gust of wind, the bark of a dog, jolted her awake. Luca rested near the window, his breathing rough but steady. The wound on his leg looked clean now, but the scar around it had turned hard, rope-like. A mark that would never fade. She poured coffee into a thermos, pulled on her old boots, and slung her raincoat over one arm. Luca whined softly, trying to stand. "Not today," she said, crouching beside him. "You've done enough." But his gaze followed her to the door. It wasn't pleading, it was knowing. That same look he'd had in the truck the night she found him. The look that said, "Don't go alone." By the time she reached the forest road, fog had settled thick across the ground. The truck's headlights carved narrow tunnels through it. She parked near the ditch, engine off, and listened. The forest was breathing, faint, cautious. Mara started walking toward the clearing. Every few steps she stopped to listen. Water dripped from the leaves in slow, rhythmic beats. A raven called in the distance, the sound bouncing between trees like an echo from another time. When she reached the old cabin, she froze. Boot prints, fresh, 2 sets. The hunters had already been there. Her stomach knotted as she crouched by the tracks. They led past the cabin and down toward the creek. The smell of cigarette smoke still hung faint in the air. She followed, careful not to break twigs underfoot. After 10 minutes, she heard voices. "Snare's gone," one said. "He's getting smarter." "Then we set more," the other replied. "By the stream. He'll come back. They always do." Mara ducked behind a tree. The younger hunter kicked at the mud, checking his rifle. The older one was crouched near the water, setting another trap. The sound of metal teeth clinking sent a chill through her spine. She wanted to yell to tell them to stop, but one wrong move and they'd know she was there. Instead, she backed away, heart hammering. If she could reach the cabin, she could maybe warn the fox off before it was too late. As she turned, something brushed her leg. She gasped, then froze. A flash of red darted between the trees. The fox. He stopped a few feet away, eyes locked on hers. His fur was damp, his ribs faint beneath the coat. There was no fear this time, only urgency. He took a step toward her, then another, and suddenly she understood. He wasn't hiding from the hunters. He was trying to lead her somewhere. "Show me," she whispered. The fox turned and sprinted into the trees. Mara followed, branches snapping across her shoulders, mud sucking at her boots. The forest blurred, green, brown, red. Her lungs burned. She lost sight of him for a second, then saw him again, tail flicking like a signal light through the fog. They reached the hollow under the oak again, but it wasn't empty this time. Inside, the two kits huddled together, trembling. And there, beside them, was Luca. Mara froze, disbelief punching the air out of her chest. She hadn't brought him. She'd locked the door, certain he couldn't move that far. But somehow, he'd followed. His bandaged leg was bleeding again, the wrap torn. But he stood between the kits and the open forest, tail down, chest heaving. "Luca," she breathed, kneeling. "Oh no." The fox paced beside him, circling protectively. The two animals, predator and prey, side by side again, facing the same direction, the path that led down to the creek. The hunters' voices were getting closer. Mara's mind raced. She had minutes, maybe less. She could grab the kits and run, but the fox would stay. Luca would follow him again, and this time the gunfire would end it for both. She looked around. Branches, rocks, the slope behind the oak. The rain had softened the ground. If she could lead the hunters this way, make the earth give way. The fox's ears twitched. He turned to her, eyes sharp, reading her the way he always did. "You understand, don't you?" she whispered. "We have to end it." He blinked slowly, almost a nod. Then he nudged one of the kits closer to her boot, a silent trust that cut straight through her. She picked both up, wrapping them in her jacket. Luca limped closer, resting his muzzle against her knee. "Stay," she said, tears streaking down her mud-smeared face. "Please stay." But Luca didn't move. He lifted his head toward the sound of the men, a single low growl building in his throat. The fox joined him. 2 heartbeats, 1 rhythm. Then, the first gunshot split the air. Mara ducked, clutching the kits to her chest. The fox darted toward the noise, tail flashing once before he disappeared behind the trees. Luca followed, dragging his wounded leg, barking hoarsely. "Luca, no!" She stumbled after them, but the fog swallowed everything. The forest erupted. Shouts, footsteps, another gunshot, the sharp crack of metal snapping shut. Then silence. Mara's voice broke. "Luca!" No answer, only the slow drip of rain. She pushed through the trees, breath ragged, until she saw it. The creek, shallow but red with mud. One trap lay shattered beside the bank, its chain ripped clean out of the ground. And beside it, a torn piece of red fur caught on the metal. Her knees gave out. But before despair could take hold, a sound rose from the other side of the creek. Faint, weak, a whine. She lifted her head. Luca stood at the edge of the clearing, blood streaking his leg, his chest rising in broken breaths. Behind him, the fox limped forward, slower, weaker but alive. For a moment, the world stopped. Rain softened. The hunters were gone. The two animals faced each other. The fox stepped closer until their heads touched, a quiet, reverent motion. Luca's tail wagged once, tired but certain. The fox turned then, disappearing into the brush, one last glance over his shoulder before vanishing for good. Mara ran to Luca, falling to her knees beside him. His body trembled against hers, every breath shallow, but he was alive. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "You did it, buddy. You found him." Luca's eyes fluttered shut. She felt his heartbeat slow, but steady, not fading, resting. Above them, the rain began again, softer this time, washing the blood from the earth. Mara stayed there until the light changed, until the forest looked golden again, and for a heartbeat she could swear she saw a flash of red at the edge of the trees, watching her. She didn't call out. She just smiled through the tears and whispered, "He's safe now." And the forest seemed to breathe in reply. For 2 days, Mara didn't leave Luca's side. The vet said he'd lost too much blood, but his heart was still strong. Stronger than it should have been. "He shouldn't have made it this far," the vet murmured. Mara only nodded. She already knew why. She'd seen it. The way Luca had looked at the fox before collapsing, the silent understanding between them. That bond had kept him alive once. And now, somehow, It was still keeping him alive again. The kits slept in a crate by the corner of the clinic room. She'd brought them in after the storm, cleaned them, fed them with a syringe. Tiny, trembling things that pressed their bodies together when they heard thunder. She decided to keep them until the wildlife center could take them. But in truth, she couldn't imagine letting them go. On the third morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time in days, the world smelled like earth instead of rain. Luca raised his head when the door opened. His eyes, tired but bright, followed the beam of light sliding across the floor. Mara crouched beside him, her hand resting on his chest. "You feel that?" she whispered. "That's the sun. You made it through the storm." He licked her wrist once, slow, deliberate, as if agreeing. Outside, the forest shimmered with new life. Steam rose from the ground where puddles had begun to dry. Somewhere deep in the woods, birds started calling again. But beneath the songs, faint and almost unreal, Mara thought she heard something else, a single, distant bark. Not a dog's, a fox's. Her chest tightened. She stood, hesitated only a second, then grabbed her coat. Luca tried to follow, whining, but she shook her head. "Not this time, buddy. You rest." The forest greeted her with silence. No footprints, no tracks, just the sound of wind through wet leaves. She walked past the old oak, now green again, its roots hiding the hollow where everything had begun. The towel was gone, the ground smoothed over. No sign of life, except for a few strands of red fur tangled in the moss. She knelt and ran her fingers through them. The fur was soft, dry now. It didn't feel like death. It felt like a memory the forest had chosen to keep. For a long time, Mara stayed there, the sounds of life all around her. Wings, water, the heartbeat of earth itself. Then, faintly, she heard it again. That bark. Closer this time. When she looked up, she saw movement near the ridge. A flash of red, a lean silhouette against the sun. The fox stood there, alive, whole, his fur glowing in the light like fire. He watched her. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, didn't speak. The kits stirred in the crate she carried against her chest, whimpering softly. The fox tilted his head, ears twitching, then gave one short bark, the same sound she'd heard in the storm. And just like that, he turned and vanished into the trees. Mara smiled through tears she didn't try to hide. "You're welcome," she whispered. By the time she returned to the clinic, the kits were asleep, bundled in her coat. Luca raised his head when he smelled them. His tail wagged once, weak but steady. She placed the crate beside him. One of the kits stirred, yawned, and pressed a tiny paw against the glass. Luca pressed his nose to the same spot, closing his eyes. Mara felt her chest ache in that quiet way that only truth can. It wasn't instinct or survival. It was memory. Somehow, deep inside that animal heart, he remembered. The vet came in and paused, his expression softening. "They shouldn't be near him," he said gently. "They're not near him," Mara replied. "They're with him." A week later, Luca was walking again, slower, limping but free of the sling. Mara took him home, the kit sleeping in a box by the window. Every night, Luca would lie beside them, listening to the forest outside. Sometimes, when the moon was full, he'd lift his head and let out one low, quiet howl, not loud enough to wake the neighbors, just enough to reach whatever waited in the trees. And somewhere out there, the fox would answer. It became their ritual. Two hearts calling across the distance, reminding each other that the storm was over, that the promise had been kept. Months passed. The kits grew stronger. One evening, Mara opened the window and watched them slip into the woods, quick flashes of orange vanishing through the tall grass. Luca sat beside her, watching, his tail brushing the floor in slow rhythm. "You did it again," she whispered. "You let them go." He leaned his head against her leg, and for a moment the silence felt like understanding. The wind shifted, carrying a scent she hadn't noticed in months, pine, rain, and something wild. She looked toward the tree line and swore she saw movement, two shapes side by side, pausing just long enough to look back before fading into the forest. Later that night, Mara sat alone on the porch. Luca slept beside her, dreaming, paws twitching. Fireflies blinked between the grass. The stars looked closer than they had in years. She thought about that first night. The storm, the trap, the fear. How something wild had stood guard over something tame, refusing to leave. She had seen cruelty that week. Men setting traps for profit, life treated like a nuisance. But she had also seen something else. Something that didn't fit into any rule of nature. A fox who stayed, a dog who went back, and a promise neither of them could ever speak, but both had kept. Mara reached down, brushing her fingers through Luca's fur, whispering into the dark, "You didn't just survive that night. You remembered what it means to love." The forest answered with a rustle of leaves. The air smelled of rain again, and when she closed her eyes, she could almost hear them. The echo of two voices carried on the wind, one bark, one howl, rising and fading together until they became the same sound. That night, Mara didn't just save a fox or a dog. She saved the part of herself that still believed wild hearts could keep their promises.